Welcome to the Directions Mag Geoinspirations podcast series with Joseph Kerski.
Greetings, folks. Welcome to another installment of the Geoinspirations column with Directions Magazine. Joseph Kerski here, your host. I'm very pleased today. I know you folks are going to enjoy this. I've got Bleys Andromeda Focht here with me. Bleys, greetings and welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for the time.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure, and it's great to get the word out about what I do up in Alaska.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to say that Bleys is joining me from the last frontier from Alaska. And Bleys, if you could describe what exactly you do up there. I say up because for me in Colorado, it's sort of northwest, across a couple states, across a little bit of Canada on into Alaska. But also, if you could describe a little bit about how you got to the position that you are in today, that would be fascinating. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently, my title is Natural Resource Specialist with the State of Alaska Division of Natural Resources. In actuality, I'm a coal mining inspector and permitter. So the job gets split between on the ground, looking for environmental releases or housekeeping habits, construction of bridges and valley fills, etc. And then in the office, you're going back and forth with the Clean Water Act, your NIPD's permits, how everything relates to the state management plan for post-mine reclamation, making sure everything aligns with the goals of the state. A big part of my job is GIS work. I'm very, very thankful to have a boss who is pushing for new technology, especially in the UAV realm. And so a large portion of our job is to take what's on the ground and then say that it is what's in the permit, as far as their regrade and where their drainages are, where the pits are located, etc. And most recently, we've been going through some bond release maps, which are a way for them to get back the money they bond in the mining process for environmental cleanup. And that it's in 3 stages. The first stage is on how the regrade performs compared on the ground versus on paper. And that old school way would be pulling transects across the whole thing, random transects, and saying that it's close enough. Now we have moved into using UAVs and using the transects as a check for it. And so it's really neat to come back and take your surface from a drone as well as the surface that was permitted and overlay them together and look for discrepancies. I like to call it topographic reconciliation, is kind of how I feel about it, saying where it's off, where it's not. And then the next step up is the vegetative cover. And we have a near-infrared sensor that lets us use NDVI, and it's great. You can pick out dead grass versus rocks on the edge of outslopes, or your alders versus your spruce. It's fantastic. My background is in gold mining, actually. I'm from Cripple Creek, Colorado.
Indeed.
The third biggest gold producing district ever. I stumbled into geography in college because it's the one class I could read the textbook for my freshman year and enjoy. And I ended up working at the gold mine, and they didn't have much in the way of a GIS person on site. And so my first internship was actually taking the surveyor's information and the AutoCAD information and creating the projection in ArcMap. So not quite a typical intern experience where I was just kind of let loose and told to do it right, which I think is great in hindsight.
Well, it's a good testimony for, the listener to say, hey, if you don't know how to do something and your internship supervisor, or your current position supervisor asks you to do something, it's okay to say, I'm not familiar with that, but I can learn. And you just did it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of making a job enjoyable as well. Is if you knew everything about your job, it wouldn't be enjoyable. The ability to show up at a workplace and seek new information or new ways to do the same task that may be more efficient or more accurate. It's great to be in that opportunity.
Bleys, you know I'm in the field of education. I actually might use that phrase of yours. If you knew everything about your job, it wouldn't be enjoyable. If you grant me permission, I'd like to be able to use that in the future because it is so appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially as we move forward in, I mean, you were touching a bit on this, the advent of new techniques, new tools, hardware, software, data, et cetera, that we're using in the field of geospatial technology, UAVs being one of them. That is more essential than ever, right? That we embrace, okay, we're lifelong learners and we are immersed in a field that is rapidly changing. And in so doing our jobs, we are also advancing the whole field itself, right? We're not waiting for it to happen. You, for example, at the Alaska DNR, you're actually pushing the boundaries forward, not just in your own DNR, but other agencies would look at Alaska DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, and say, I want to do that too. Bleys, how do I do that? I salute you. Can you describe a little bit of, I work with universities, community colleges, and other levels of education, primary and secondary, after-school programs. In the universities and community colleges I've been to, just about every single remote sensing program, and this isn't going to be any surprise to you or probably most of the listeners, but most, if not all of them, have embraced some sort of UAV technology over the last 4 or 5 years. How many UAVs do you actually have there at the Department of Natural Resources, and what are your plans, going forward into this now, the 2020s, in terms of that technology? Where do you want to see it move to?
As for how many UAV we have in DNR, I can't quite speak to that. We have Division of Forestry as part of DNR, and I know they use UAV for fire mapping, but my division doesn't interact with them so much, and my boss takes the lead on all of the DNR UAV. He's the lead for essentially DNR UAV, as I see it. As our coal mining program, we have one, I'm not sure quite what's active right now, 1 or 2 Mavic Airs, 1 or 2 Phantoms, and an M210 with a multispectral camera on it. And so the Mavic Airs and the Phantoms are both, I wouldn't necessarily call them recreational grade. The Air might be, but the Phantom turned out really good data. And the M210 is certainly an industrial use drone. We also combine this with propeller points, which are geo-referenced panels that we place out. And so it's essentially a checkered square, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. And someone will go place those in the field. And the drone will fly it. Essentially, it's flying GPS receivers. So it's already kind of geo-referencing it for more accuracy. And that's been a huge help as well. It's not just the drone you have, it's your support software. We use AggieSoft to model our images as well. We've done some drone to map as well as Pix4D, but AggieSoft has produced the most consistent results so far, especially without I've heard it referred to like the black box effect of you can put result A, you can put your data in and you'll get an answer out, but you don't quite know exactly what's happening. And we found AggieSoft lets us really dial that in more.
Well, it certainly has revolutionized many fields. I remember back in my USGS days, we had a whole team of photogrammetrists, right, that would create 2D and 3D models from, at that time, aerial imagery. And you're right, some of these tools are so push button these days is that it's wonderful, and I don't pine for the old clunky days. We are definitely standing on the shoulders of giants, right? These photogrammetrists really knew their stuff. But on the other hand, sometimes from a teaching or a research perspective, you do want to dig into what these tools actually do, so you can make some adjustments if you need to. I'm right with you there.
Yeah.
Thinking about the DNR, I have such respect for these Department of Natural Resources, having worked with people in just a few months ago, I was up at the Minnesota GIS-LIS conference, and they have great support from their Department of Natural Resources in that whole, remember that DNR Garmin, DNR GPS program that many of us used for years to get our data from a GPS unit into something like ArcGIS? I mean, that all came from the DNR.
Yeah, that's great.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I actually just referenced a friend who's at a gold mine in Mali to that same little tool.
It's
And
wonderful.
I've used it every place I've been with
Yeah,
that. That's one of my favorite tools going.
indeed. Well, and also thinking about your particular Department of Natural Resources, I mean, just the vast terrain, the vast area, the weather conditions, et cetera, that you have to deal with, it just must be a great challenge, but also a rewarding one because you're actually helping people in the state and also, in your interaction with departments in other states and other parts of the world, you're definitely impacting, I think, the planet in a positive way. Hey, could you describe this a little bit? When you were actually in Cripple Creek, just out of university and also in your current job, do you actually get to go into mines?
Yeah, of
Okay.
course. That's maybe not the best part, but one of my favorite parts. So Cripple Creek is an open pit mine. It's probably about 1,000 feet deep right now. And that's basically just a giant hole in the ground, just like a sand and gravel pit or a quarry. The coal mines in Alaska are similar to the open pit, but they're a strip pit is how it's referred to. And so they are not near as deep.
Mm-hmm.
And what's able to happen is after the initial cut goes in, that material has to go somewhere. That's not the coal bearing strata. But from there on, your overburden or spoils, depending on your terminology, can go into your open hole. And so you're never disturbing miles and miles of ground that's open. You're concurrently reclaiming the land as you go.
Mm-hmm.
As far as underground mines, I've been in underground mines in Colorado and Nevada, and it's you either love it or hate it, I think, and I love it, but it's a unique experience, and that opens a whole new world as far as GIS and mapping. I believe an Australian company just came out with a drone designed to fly underground drifts and map them out with LiDAR.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And this is huge. From mining industry is very safety conscious, and this is a great safety tool. You lose an expensive piece of equipment, but it's not a life.
Right. Yep.
That's everything and great. And as far as underground mines in Alaska, I have not been in one. So
one of the reasons why I was interested in chatting with you about that for a minute or two is I'm a caver. So anything, underground with all kinds of, exploration possibilities. I love physical geography, always have geology. I used to work at USGS. It's just fascinating to me. And on another angle, Bleys, if you don't mind, there are people that, have very strong opinions, of course, on energy, and rightly so, right? As we move forward into the 21st century here,
Yes.
Now in the third decade, it's like, okay, we've got some serious power requirements for our planet and always increasing. How are we going to power that planet for a sustainable future? And knowing a little bit about what you just described, I imagine there are just numerous regulations, environmental regulations of various kinds that you just have to juggle and deal with. How do you keep that all straight? Not just the volume of the regulations that must be out there and environmental guidelines and so on, but they're probably always changing, right? So how do you deal with that in addition to all the GIS things that you're doing, the remote sensing things that you're doing, the inspections, et cetera?
So great questions. Coal, good or bad, is federally regulated. All coal mining in the country has to meet the Federal Surface Control Mining and Reclamation Act of, I believe, 1977. And so we can meet or exceed the federal code for that section. And that's where we get we call it ASMACRA, Alaska Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our rules and regs. As far as mining in general goes, hard rock mining is not federally regulated, as far as I know. And so every state's kind of left up to its own interpretation of what's reclamation, what's not, what will we allow, acreage-wise, pit depth, etc. And to address the energy topic is I don't know how. I'm not.
It's probably beyond the scope of our interview, but just any sort of insights that you might have. again, this is primarily aimed at, encouraging people to go into, think about different career paths, but it's just really fascinating to have someone like you on here that's actually living and breathing this stuff, on the job every day. You're face to face with, this is a reality, and what can I do in the DNR to make sure that however we're going to get energy, it is done in the best, least obtrusive, least harmful way possible using geotechnologies and other tools.
Yes, I think that is, and using all of our technology is a really big difference maker, I think, as well. The coal mines that we look after, Usabelli coal mine, they've started using UAVs as well to fly their dumps and their pits and have up to current, today's data. They can go out and fly it and see exactly what it looks like today. And then if they need to re-engineer something that's more efficient and less environmentally destructive, they can, instead of using maps that were made 3 years ago because they haven't updated their maps until, except for every 5 years, for example. As far as the conditions on this coal mine, there's no chemicals used on site, and it's relatively small. It'll sound really big to you, but last year they extracted less than 1 million tons of coal, which it sounds like a lot, but that's, some states spill more than that in a year. And then all of our coal ends up going to interior Alaska right now, to Fairbanks and the military bases near Fairbanks.
Okay, so it's not even exported out of the state.
Nope. And I can't, I don't know if you want to put this interview or not, but I'm not necessarily a coal fan, but there is no alternative in Fairbanks that I've heard. It's pretty calm year round. They're down to 3 hours of daylight right now, and they can't get liquid natural gas, and there's no pipeline.
Yep.
So,
well, I like for students and the general public to think about the realities of our world. At the current time, 2020, we have a variety of ways that we get energy, right? Some of them are, things that we've done for 150 or 200 years. Some of them are new technologies, but whatever ways we can get it, well, eventually, I'm an optimist. I think eventually we're going to get to all energy is going to be a sustainable, clean source. We're going to get there. It's just there's going to be some bumps along the road before we can innovate in the kinds of situations like you're describing. The reality is you've got low light, you've got, permafrost, et cetera, and physical challenges out there. So it's not like we can, you and I in our, geography, environmental, backgrounds, we'd love to be able to say, yes, wouldn't it be grand if all agriculture was sustainable, all energy sources were sustainable, clean and sustainable, all food production, all tourism, everything was eco-friendly. In my wanderings around the planet, I've been very encouraged by, people like you that are innovative, they're using technology, they're using data, they're using their own brains to make wise and smart decisions. So I actually am an optimist. I think we'll get there. I really believe that we will.
I agree. And I love that mining historically has been a little bit of a closed-minded, it's got a reputation for being a closed-minded industry. And I've really kind of taken pride in coming in as someone who would identify as environmentally friendly and trying to approach mining from that aspect. I understand mining is needed and nobody likes to look at it, but how can we do this in the best way possible is my goal.
Yeah, well said.
I look at a mine site.
And I tell students, look, as you're going into careers, how can you make a difference? It may be in a established industry that maybe some people would not want to go into, maybe like yours. That some students are like, no, there's no way I'd ever go into that because of maybe some of the history and so on. But wouldn't you want to just have an open mind about maybe you can make a huge difference in that agency or in that whole industry like you're doing, Bleys? I just really salute you. I mean, we want smart people to be in energy for one, and in health, and in business, and in engineering, and in tourism, et cetera, making smarter decisions. And I'm wondering, as you described your journey in this, was there a person, a class, a topic that had most inspired you along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. There's yeah, I can call him old. I think he's over 60. I've worked with him. I knew him as a kid, and his name's Gary Horton. He from Washington, moved out to Cripple Creek in 72, I believe. Worked underground because that's what there was for work in Cripple Creek in the 70s. And he left the district and went on to get his geophysics degree from James Madison University, and actually came back to the mine site to work because he loved living there so much. But he really taught me that it's all about trying to find your niche when you're at a job. You know, you're going to go to a job, and there's no way you're going to like every part of the job every day. It's just reality, I think. But can you find something that makes you happy? And especially, can you find something that is satisfying and beneficial to your employer at the same time? And it may not be something that was already being done. You know, he was really great. He started a big recycling program at the mine site. I mean, it's not groundbreaking, but it was personally satisfying to him. The company loved it because it's great. It's recycling. Not just the PR, but, you know, their trash went down, so they're shipping less dumpsters of garbage out.
Nice.
You know, he's been a huge influence in how I approach how I look at a job and day to day, and not just day to day, but what can I do today that will help me in 3 months, of whether it's part of my day-to-day daily assigned duties or not. Can I go above and beyond to make it better?
Well said. Thanks for sharing. A couple of things that you touched on, I'd just like to expand a little bit. First of all, there are some listeners, I'm sure, that are pushing that 60-year-old mark or have exceeded it. So I just wanted to encourage them. Okay, you've been around in geo, enviro, GIS for a while, decades, maybe since the 20th century, but you still have a lot of contributions to make. And so be encouraged. I mean, Bleys has got a really good mentor, person he looked up to. And so I just want to encourage, there's a lot of people involved with geo mentoring, for example. Also, second thing, I was at GMU about 2 months ago, very impressed by the faculty and the students there and their various programs. One of the things that they're doing now is they're embedding GIS in their School of Business, which is really exciting because in marketing, supply chain management, site selection, etc., they are using, well, they don't call it GIS per se. It's usually location analytics in a lot of these business schools, but I don't care what they call it. The good thing is that they're empowering those students to think spatially and use geospatial technologies to, and this is another thing you touched on, to benefit your employer. It's great if you care about the environment. Hey, great, I do too, and hopefully everybody does. But how are you going to, as you, I think, well put it, benefit your employer by the perspectives, the skills, the problem-solving abilities that you have? I think you put that really well. Benefit your employer. It's not about you. Sure, we want to all be lifelong learners, but if you go to your prospective employer, say, well, I want to learn more about the environment, or I want to get out in the field, or I want to learn more GIS or remote sensing. Well, great. Why should they pay you to do that, right? What value are you going to bring to that organization? Which sounds kind of, common sense, but I think it's important to remind people that you're benefiting your employer, and it is really a team effort. Unless you're a sole proprietor of your own company, it is really all about, how do you bring value to your employer so that the employer can bring value to, in your case, the state of Alaska and the citizens of the state.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. One of your interview questions was what do I think is the most important thing to work on as far as education, STEM, geospatial community. And I just wrote down not getting stuck in your, I really think that we don't like change as people. Most people don't like change. And it's really easy to go, show up, open ArcMap and just plug and chug the way you always have. Maybe there's a better way. And the open-mindedness to seek it out, or at least be willing to listen when someone approaches with new ideas that are outside the norm, or maybe just not available in your area currently, and you could be the one to introduce it. I think that's really big for innovation and advancement of the geospatial technologies.
Yeah, thanks for the words of wisdom. I've not heard that plug and chug phrase before, Bleys, so that was an interesting one. But I get your point. It is we are always telling folks that as well. It's great to have these tools in ArcGIS Pro, ArcMap, or whatever tool you're using, but it's your brain that is the most important tool, right? You are the one that is framing the questions, and you're thinking about the problems to solve, and also think about problems maybe that your employer hasn't even told you to solve, but you're just being observant. Say, I want to solve that problem like the person you described earlier. Hey, there's no recycling program here. I'm going to start one. Okay, great, do it. Yeah, encouraging people to think outside the software box, think outside even the set of problems that is part of your day-to-day work. That's exactly the kind of people that we need on our planet to move us forward. And isn't it interesting, Bleys, that as the years have gone on now, that we are having more and more different kinds of folks with different backgrounds and a diversity of opinions and thoughts and so on from different disciplines that are in geospatial now. We've got the sociologists and the economists and the even people that have come up from art and business, engineering now, data science, and other computer science and other fields that are really lending a lot of richness to our whole profession and beyond. It's really an exciting time.
It is. And I like to think of anything that's on the earth can be mapped in my mind. And if you map it with a technology, I think that's in some regards a geospatial technology.
Indeed.
And how you approach it and
the boundaries of what we consider to be a map now are rapidly transforming, aren't they? When you look at things like the flowing data blog and some of the visualizations coming out from the New York Times even. I mean, a whole wide variety of sources nowadays. Sure, think critically about where those sources are and who created them and what classification method they used and, all that kind of core stuff. But that said, what we think of in terms of geo-visualization is rapidly changing and expanding. And I think for the better, it's lending a lot of, again, like we touched on earlier, new ways of solving problems. And it doesn't have to be, in some ways, we you and I and others, we love mapping. And that's why we got into this. But the goal is not really to make the perfect map, right? Or to make the perfect visualization. It's to actually think about and solve problems. And so having these boundaries become a bit blurred and expanded about what is a geovisualization, I think is an exciting development.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I was a kid, we'd go through the local Cripple Creek Museum and they had, I'll call it a map for lack of a better term, but it was a glass display case and it had the underground mine tunnels stacked up on glass plates for each 100 feet level. And it was so fascinating as a kid to be able to look at this and say, well, here's where I live, and 600 feet below me, there's a tunnel. It's just amazing the way we visualize stuff. And now, obviously, we aren't turning out these historic, great big blocky dioramas, I think is the term. And we're, shifting more to web maps and quicker access data. But the innovation is still there. And the different ways to visualize data. Not everything has to be, point line, polygon, 2D, throw it up, and it does the job. But to design a map that answers more questions or answers the question better in the same way, a map is, in the end, it's still a visualization in your head at the end of the day.
Yeah, good point. A couple things there. I visited the Molly Kathleen gold mine in Cripple Creek once. For people that are interested, they give tours. It's fascinating. You go. It's a shaft. You go down on a it's like an elevator, right, Bleys? You go down on this.
You go down on a skip. It's called a skip.
Yeah, it is absolutely amazing. That you've got 1,000-ish feet down. It's just absolutely amazing. And then the second thing you touched on, that's part of the reason why I like these tactile methods of understanding spatial concepts. So you've probably seen these as well. each one of them is different and unique, but I love them all. And those are those 3D sandboxes. Those, they usually have some sort of camera above them, and you've got a physical sand that you're moving around. Some actually simulate, okay, now we're going to drop some water, some rainwater on the landscape, and where's the water pool? And I just love those. I want one for my house.
That would be so fun.
I love
to
those
have.
things. A lot of universities build those, and again, they'll get the different people around campus that are handy with carpentry, but also the GIS people, and I just think they're great. Kind of along the same lines, I've always loved those stream tables, where you've got a pump and it's pumping water to the top of it, and the whole thing is tilted, and so you see the braiding of the streams and the meanders. I love those things.
Yeah, the actual ability to see it in 3D.
Some of them don't even have real sand. They're like little polymer balls, and they have different densities, so you can simulate, what happens when you've got dense material versus more lightweight material, and how does it erode and how does it deposit. I just think those are great. They're not cheap, but they're great teaching tools. I used to see those displayed at the Geological Society of America conferences, and I always spent way too much time at those exhibits. I just love those. So I'm right with you.
Yeah.
On the tactile, there's still a lot of value in that. And on a really, really simple example, I sometimes use this super easy, but again, I think kind of a powerful way of teaching just plain old contour lines, topographic maps. You get these clear salad trays from like a deli. They're plastic,
okay.
and you lay each one of them on a topo map, and with each layer, you're drawing a different contour line. And so when you stack these, maybe 9 or 10 of them, then you can rotate around. You actually see the ridge or the pit or the esker or the, the valley. You're seeing it with this clear, with these drawn lines on it. It's just, again, it's a really simple tool, but if students have difficulty, interpreting a 2D or a 3D paper or digital contour topographic lines, the hypso layer, for example, they can look at this and say, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, I love all of these kinds of visualizations. I'm right with you. Being sensitive to your time, though, I just wanted to touch on a couple of last bits, if you don't mind. And you touched on this a little bit about your advice to a new professional in the field when you talked about, attitudes to have going into your employer. But if you want to just kind of sum up or add to your advice to a new professional in this field.
I still consider myself a new professional in this field as well. But I don't know if it's right or wrong, but my goal is really not having a goal. I go into it. I showed up at my first job. I knew I liked GIS because I like maps. That's great. But how can I benefit my company with maps? And I was able to look at everything with an open mind and see where they were lacking, where I was lacking to get them there, and how I can do that. And so, maybe it's taking your geospatial perspective to a place of business that has never had one before. Not that we don't need city planners and GIS analysts, but there's more to GIS than GIS analysts. I don't use GIS all day, every day, but I do use it enough that I would consider myself a geospatial professional. And I just feel that every industry in some way could be a geospatial industry, or at least have a geospatial niche inside that industry, and to not limit yourself to, going to school, getting a GIS degree because you like maps, and then just only looking at jobs that use GIS in the title.
Very good point. And sometimes it takes, and this is a bit scary, but let's say, you and I and others listening have probably read articles about, X% of jobs by the end of this 2020s decade have not even been invented yet. Maybe it takes a person to go to an organization saying, okay, you don't have anybody here that is doing anything with geospatial technology, but let me show you how I can help you meet your mission, your goals, save you money, be more efficient, be more eco-friendly with the skills and abilities that I have. Maybe it's you going to that organization, again, admitting that it's a bit scary if they actually don't have a position advertised, you going there and saying, this is what I can offer you. But maybe in some cases, that's what it's going to take, because to solve all of these complex issues of our 21st century world, we're going to need exactly what you're saying, Bleys, I believe, geospatially enabled organizations. And that takes the geospatially enabled people to bring those organizations to realization that, yeah, this is valuable. And that organization might go to that individual and say, well, why do we need this kind of thing? I've got Google Maps on my phone. Why do I need anything else? Well, let me show you what this can actually do for your organization. So I really like what you're saying here. Appreciate the comments. Hey, Bleys, what about this? Do you have a favorite map or a favorite book that you'd like to share?
I mean, my first favorite map that comes to mind is the 3D diorama. It just was such a great influence on me.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to pick another favorite map, it was, I don't remember who the author is. I'm sure I can find it. But it was an old 1800s map, and it had, when we hadn't fully mapped everything out yet. And then on the bottom of the map, I believe it had, the height of the mountains, and it had a mountain that didn't exist as the tallest mountain in the world.
Ah.
And from what I've read, it took a little while to kind of break the myth that this mountain didn't exist. And it's just really easy to see what's on a map and believe it. And I just really like that this map was now 21st century, obviously wrong. It was so believable back then.
It reminds me, Bleys, of the North America map, actually maps, plural, showing California as an island. Remember those? And they had these accounts from sailors that said, we sailed around California. We know it's an island. And so it persisted for, I believe, 120-ish years on maps until it finally evolved into the shape with the peninsula on the south end. But it kind of reminds me of that. Let me ask you this. Many of us have this wonderful image of Alaska, and I've been up there a couple times, once for the USGS and once on vacation, and absolutely loved it, of course. What's the best thing about actually living there? Because I'm sure there's some differences, right, between visiting and actually living there. But what's the best thing about living in Alaska?
Boy, that's a tough question. For me, at least right now, it is the daylight. In the summer, it's really easy to get off work and lose track of time outside until 11 p.m. or midnight. And in the winter, the days are short, but you get hour-long sunsets every day. Just the way the curvature of the earth and the sunset takes so long and it's really easy to come up and visit and be kind of amazed at how long the day is. Most people are saying that because they don't come in winter. But then they get to go home and they get to go back to their regular sleep schedule. Not up here where you're, 19 hours of daylight in the summer. And there is just no sense of normalcy there.
Yeah.
Summer, winter, it's really bizarre to experience months on end of constant change of daylight.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, yeah, especially where you've got this rapidly increasing and decreasing number of hours of sunlight, in March and October-ish, right in there.
Yeah.
I also
right
wonder, is it a challenge when, so you're out till midnight and, June, July, August, and I've got to wake up at 6 o'clock and go to work. Is that a big shock to the system? Or do you just say, hey, in the summer, I'm just not going to get that much sleep because I want to be able to take advantage of the natural beauty and be out hiking until midnight?
I would say that a lot of people have taken that attitude towards it, especially, June, July, around the solstice. And sometime around August, when you start to be able to, see the stars again at some point in night, pretty much everyone's going to have some downtime where they crash and they're going to have to make up. You're just physically worn out because you are chasing the daylight. And it's really hard to it's really hard to tell yourself to go to bed when the sun is still inches off the horizon.
So have you been over to Nome, Kotzebue, way over there, Northwest?
Unfortunately, I have not been out to Northwest Alaska yet. There is a coal field out there, but it's, as far as extraction, it's dormant right now. It's just so remote and so environmentally challenging to get to live there, work there. Not to mention try and permit a coal mine in the Arctic is just a nightmare for a company to consider, I would imagine. I've got some friends out in Nome, and it sounds like it's very different. They deal with a lot of sea ice issues and weather the weather in Alaska has changed my mind of what bad weather is. Massive windstorms. We've had a lot of rain in December this year in Alaska. You can call it climate change or just weather. Overall trends are it's getting warmer, significantly warmer, fast. Northwest Alaska also has a lot of draw. There's a lot of minerals out there. Red Dog Mine is up northeast of Kotzebue, I believe, and that's the largest zinc mine in the world.
I did not know that. Okay, interesting. I'm learning a lot from you today, and touching on that last thing, and I'm sure that you deal with this with maybe new employees that are up there. You probably have a big safety briefing, right? Not just on the job, but people moving there. That you need to. It's not just a good thing to know about weather changes, but your life could depend on it, right? You really have to be tough and resilient and be prepared. I mean, even here in Colorado, where I am and where you used to live, as you know, you think, it's the lower 48, I can go in the mountains and I'm going to be fine. But every year, right, people get into dangerous situations because they're not prepared. They're up there at high altitude. They're wearing a T-shirt, and all of a sudden it'll snow in July, that kind of stuff. But up by you, that whole situation times 50, times 100, right, where you're constantly having to, and probably not just the cold extremes, but I would think the heat extremes too in the summertime, hot. And it does get hot up there. I know it gets hot as a geographer. I understand the swings that you've got. And so, conversely, you have enough water and you're hiking around in June and you've got these long daylight hours, et cetera.
Yeah, it just brings a whole new set of challenges. When I've driven up here twice when we were moving up that process, and it just really struck me like Colorado on steroids. The rivers in Colorado, we call them creeks.
Yep.
The mountains they're not as tall. We don't have 50 some 14ers. I think there's only 4 or 5 mountains in the state that are over 14,000 feet. But in Anchorage, you sit here at sea level and you look up at 5,000, 6,000 foot peaks, and tree line's only 2,500 or so. And so you really get that feel of just big. Everything's big, and it's kind of awe-inspiring to take that in on a daily basis.
I admire you, Bleys. You're an innovator. You're a lifelong learner. You appreciate the natural beauty. You're doing all that you can to ensure that the earth is as well protected as it can be in your field. And you're, I think, a really great example of a person that embraces new tools, new technologies, but thinking outside the box, challenging yourself. And so really appreciate all the comments that you've shared today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a learning experience for me too to sit down and think about some of these topics and questions.
Well, I know the listeners really appreciate it, and we've got a small paragraph that accompanies this interview. Appreciate the links that you shared there. Bleys, I just wish you all the best success in the future. Continue being the inspiring person that you are.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for doing this podcast and working with the magazine. It's great reference and reading material that more people should take advantage of, I feel.
We had Bleys Andromeda Focht on today from the Alaska Department of Natural Resources. Thanks for joining us.